They can also recognize faces and can hold a grudge against someone who was rude to them for several years.
Crow communication was just decoded, and what it reveals about humans will change how you see every bird on every wire above your head. Scientists fed thousands of hours of crow calls into an advanced AI, expecting noise. What the machine found instead was a structured language, and the moment researchers started reading what these birds actually say to each other, they realized almost all of it is about us. Not hawks, not food, us, our faces, our habits, our threat levels, our names.
Basically, crows exist where people exist. Even in the remote wilderness, it's where there's a campground or something like that.
These birds have been building detailed profiles on every human in their territory and broadcasting that data across a continent-wide network for generations. You are already in the database. You just never knew it existed. What the AI decoded next is the part nobody was ready for. What the machine heard in the dark. The team did not set out to decode a language. That was never the goal. A research group at the University of California, San Diego, had spent the better part of 2 years wiring up field sites across the Pacific Northwest. Hundreds of directional microphones hidden inside tree bark, inside fake rocks, tucked into the undersides of park benches. The equipment was disguised well enough that passing joggers never noticed it. The crows did not appear to notice it either. That assumption, it turns out, was wrong. But we will get to that. The original mission was narrow. Feed thousands of hours of crow vocalizations into a machine learning system and see if it could sort them. Put the alarm calls in one column, the food calls in another, the territory warning somewhere else. It was data housekeeping. The kind of grunt work that gets delegated to algorithms because no human wants to sit with headphones on for 2 years listening to birds. The algorithm ran for 11 days straight. Then, the team lead, a behavioral acoustics researcher who had spent 15 years studying corvid communication, pulled up the outputs. And she stopped, because the machine had not just sorted the calls, it had found something underneath them, something that should not have been there. The AI had flagged a set of structural rules governing how the sounds combined. Rules that determined which acoustic units could follow which others. Rules that changed the meaning of a call depending on sequence. Stop, because this is the part that should be impossible. We have a word for a system of rules that governs how communication units combine to create meaning. We call it syntax. And for 100 years, the scientific consensus held that syntax was a uniquely human possession. Animal sounds were emotional signals, reflexes. A dog barks because something startled it. A cat yowls because something hurts. The sounds carried no grammar, no structure, no architecture of meaning underneath them. They were noise dressed up as communication. The AI looked at 11 days of crow recordings and told the researchers they were wrong. The team ran the analysis twice more. The structure held. The rules held every time. What started as a data sorting job had become something closer to a first contact scenario. Nobody in that room had a framework for what they were looking at. They had gone in expecting to file sounds into folders. They came out staring at grammar. And the most unsettling discovery was still 3 weeks away. They named you. Here is where it gets personal. Buried inside the recordings, the AI had isolated something it flagged as anomalous. In one sequence, a man wearing a red hat walked through a monitored park. A crow on a nearby power line called out. To anyone standing in that park, the sound was unremarkable. Just a screech. The kind of thing you walk past without registering. The AI did not walk past it. It analyzed the frequency of every note, the precise duration of each syllable, the exact gaps between sounds, and it assigned that call a unique acoustic fingerprint, not a category, not a type, a specific individual identifier that did not match any other call in the database. 3 days later, the same man returned to the park. The same crow produced the identical call, down to the frequency and the spacing. The AI matched it instantly. Interesting, but not yet extraordinary. Animals can recognize individuals. A dog knows its owner. We already knew crows had good memories. Recognition alone is not a language. Then, a week after that, the man walked through the park again. The crow that had originally identified him was perched somewhere else. A different crow, one that, according to the GPS tracking data, had never been in this section of the park during either of the previous sightings, produced the exact same call. Read that again. A bird that had never personally seen this man made the precise acoustic fingerprint that another bird had created for him. The information had transferred. The first crow had not simply reacted to the presence of the man, it had transmitted a description, a data packet, a name. The AI cross-referenced every instance of that specific call across the entire 11-day data set. It appeared exactly 4 times, always in the presence of the same individual. Never used for anyone else, never used in a different context. This was not a warning call, it was not a generic alarm, it was a proper noun. These birds had given this man a name, and they were using it consistently, accurately, and across individuals who had never met each other. You have a name in their language right now. You just do not know what it sounds like. If you have ever walked past a crow without looking up, you are already in the database. Subscribe, because what comes next changes how you will move through the world. The hardware for intelligence. Before we go further, you are probably asking the same question everyone asks at this point. How? This is a bird. The brain is the size of a walnut. How is any of this physically possible? The answer requires throwing out everything you think you know about intelligence. Here is the thing they did not teach in biology class. For most of scientific history, the cerebral cortex was treated as the hardware of intelligence, the thick, wrinkled outer layer of the mammalian brain. In humans, it is where planning happens, where language happens, where abstract thought happens. If you can do something complex, your cortex is doing the heavy lifting. The assumption was straightforward. No cortex, no serious cognition. Birds do not have a cerebral cortex. When early neuroscientists examined bird brains, they found smooth, unstructured tissue where the cortex should be. The scientists concluded the obvious thing. No cortex means nobody home. Birds were filed under biological machines and mostly left there for 100 years. Then someone looked at the neurons instead of the shape. Birds evolved a completely different structure called the pallium. It looks nothing like a cortex from the outside. But under a microscope, the density of neurons packed inside it is extraordinary. We are talking about a cognitive infrastructure comparable, weight for weight, to what you find in chimpanzee brains. That comparison is not a metaphor, it is a measurement, which is why researchers who work with these animals have started calling them feathered apes. Not poetically, literally. That hardware does things. New Caledonian crows do not just use tools, they manufacture them. Scientists filmed them landing on a specific plant called the pandanus, making a surgical incision in a leaf, and then tearing it in a precise stair-step pattern to create a jagged, serrated edge. They were building a saw, a custom-designed instrument for hooking insects out of narrow crevices and tree bark. If the tool breaks during use, they repair it. If the right plant is not available, they substitute wire or twigs. There is a design inside their head, and they execute it, adapting to material conditions in real time. Then there is the physics test. Researchers at the University of Auckland placed a narrow tube of water in front of a crow with a floating treat just out of reach. Nearby, a pile of heavy stones and a pile of lightweight styrofoam pieces. A creature running on instinct would grab whatever was closest and start dropping things in. The crow paused, looked at the stones, looked at the styrofoam, then picked up only the heavy stones, dropping them one by one, ignoring the styrofoam completely until the water level rose and the treat came within reach. Stop and think about what just happened. That bird understood that a floating object displaces no water. It solved a density and displacement problem in seconds that a human toddler would need 10 minutes to work through. This is not a reflex. This is physics intuition. This is a mind, modeling the behavior of matter before acting on it. So when the AI tells us these animals have a language with syntax, we should not be surprised. They have the hardware for it. The question is not whether they can build a complex communication system. The question is what exactly they have been saying in it and who they have been talking about. Wanted posters in the trees. The cognitive capacity is real. Now here is what they do with it. In 2006, a researcher named John Marsluff at the University of Washington designed an experiment to test whether crows could recognize specific human faces. He did not want to permanently end up on someone's enemy list, so he used a disguise, a caveman mask. Cheap plastic, exaggerated features, wild synthetic beard. He wore it while capturing and banding 7 crows on the UW campus. The birds were not harmed, they were tagged and released, but they were furious. He also used a control mask, a neutral human face with no negative associations. When researchers walked the campus in the control mask, the crows ignored them. When Marsliff put the caveman mask back on, the crows dove at him, screaming. That part is not surprising. Birds remember threats. What happened next is, the number of birds attacking the caveman mask grew. First, it was the original 7, then 20, then 40. Birds that had never been captured. Birds that had been nowhere near the tagging site. Young birds who had not yet hatched when the original incident occurred were diving at that mask with the same aggression as the birds who had personally experienced the capture. Then, 5 years after the initial experiment, Marsliff walked back onto that campus wearing the caveman mask. 5 years. Most of the original 7 birds were dead. The new generation attacked him. The face of the enemy had been transmitted generation to generation as a piece of shared information. Not instinct, not chemical signal. A description passed from one bird to the next that encoded specific visual features of a specific dangerous human with enough precision that birds who had never seen him reacted to him correctly. That is the audio version of what the AI detected in the Red Hat sequence. 2 different modalities. Same underlying system. Crows are running a facial recognition database that is updated continuously and distributed across the flock. They log the distance between your eyes, the proportions of your nose, the way you carry your weight when you walk. You are living in a surveillance grid. It has no servers, no satellites, and no power consumption. It runs on feathers and memory. And here is the thing the researchers noticed when they laid this data alongside everything else. The database was not just tracking threats, it was tracking patterns, behavioral patterns. The crows were not just recording what your face looked like. They were recording what you do, what you carry, how you move when you are about to do something they do not like. Which means they are not just watching humans, they are studying us, building a model of how we work. The data was becoming a mirror. And what it was reflecting back was something the research team had not anticipated. Crime and punishment in the air. If it were only surveillance, that would be enough. But it is not only surveillance. The AI found something embedded in the recordings that took the team weeks to fully process. A category of structured vocalizations that appeared consistently in one specific context. When a crow was dead. When a crow dies, the flock gathers. One bird locates the body and produces a specific call. Silence follows. Then dozens of crows land in the surrounding trees and remain still, sometimes for several minutes, watching the fallen bird without touching it. Researchers who observed this behavior for years described it as mourning, an emotional response rooted in the social bonds of the flock. The AI looked at the vocalizations occurring during these gatherings and found something colder and more precise than grief. The low-frequency calls exchanged during these events appear to encode cause of death information. Was it a predator? Which species? Was it a vehicle? Was it a human with a weapon? The flock is conducting a forensic analysis of the scene, drawing conclusions about the threat, and then distributing those conclusions as structured data to every living member of the community. The obituary and the safety bulletin are the same document. That is a justice system, and it extends further than funerals. Researchers documented what can only be described as crow courts, a bird that steals food from a lower-ranking member of the flock or violates some other unwritten social rule gets surrounded. The group screams at it, pecks at it, and in some cases exiles it from the territory entirely. Social order maintained through collective enforcement. Sound familiar? Now, here is what the AI added to this picture. The threat assessment calls the researchers mapped showed that crows distinguish between a human carrying a stick and a human carrying a firearm, between a hiker looking down at the trail and a hunter scanning the tree line. They read the intent behind the object you are holding. Walk out with a broom to sweep, and they stay put. Walk out with that same broom raised to swing, and they are gone before your arm moves. And there is a good list alongside the bad one. People who feed crows regularly receive gifts: shiny beads, pieces of colored glass, coins. The AI found that vocalizations directed at these individuals are acoustically distinct, softer in pitch, higher in frequency, marked with features the researchers associate with positive social bonding. The crows are paying their allies. They understand trade. They are engaging in a cross-species economy. Funerals, courts, trade agreements, wanted posters. This is not a flock of birds surviving in the margins of human civilization. This is a parallel civilization running on top of ours, with its own laws, its own economy, and its own history. And if they have been building that history around us, recording our behavior, mapping our threat levels and our generosity, then the question the data is quietly raising is this: what does that history say? And who has access to it? The analog internet. Here is where the scale of this thing breaks open entirely. Everything described so far happens at the local level. A park, a campus, a neighborhood, one flock, one database, one surveillance grid covering a few square miles. Unsettling, yes, but contained. The geographic mapping analysis changed that. The same UC San Diego team overlaid their acoustic data against location coordinates and started tracking how specific calls moved across space. Not call types, not general alarm patterns, specific, precisely structured vocal sequences, individual acoustic fingerprints. What they found had no precedent in the scientific literature. A specific structured call would appear in recordings from a suburban flock in one city. 6 months later, the identical pattern would surface in recordings from a flock in a city hundreds of miles away. The call had traveled, not because the birds had migrated. The individual birds stayed in their territories. The information moved independently of the animals carrying it, passing from flock to flock through direct contact zones at range boundaries, jumping dialect barriers that should have made cross-group communication difficult. Stop. Let that land for a second. These calls were going viral. Not as a metaphor, as a mechanism. A new piece of information introduced into one flock was propagating outward through a contact network, crossing hundreds of miles in months, upgrading the knowledge base of flocks that had no direct connection to the original source. Think about what this means for threat information. If a new type of trap gets deployed in Seattle, the knowledge of that trap and how to avoid it can reach Los Angeles before the hardware company ships the next batch. If a researcher develops a new method of capture, crows across the continent can update their behavioral protocols before the researcher publishes the paper. The entire population is running on shared firmware, and the firmware updates in real time. We invented writing so knowledge could outlast the person who held it. We invented schools so it could move between generations. We invented the internet so it could move across geography instantly. Crows have been running an analog version of all three simultaneously, and they have been doing it longer than we have existed as a species. Each generation does not start from zero. It starts from wherever the previous generation stopped. You are not looking at a flock of birds. You are looking at a distributed intelligence network with hundreds of millions of nodes, zero infrastructure cost, and continuous uptime. And somewhere inside that network, your file exists. Named, updated, distributed. The question is not whether they are sharing information about you. The question is how far that file has already traveled. The cipher. Here is where it all fractures into something without a comfortable resolution. Pay close attention right now, because this is the part the researchers are still arguing about. For months, the AI ran cleanly. It was building what the team carefully refused to call a translation, but what was functionally a growing map between crow sounds and their meanings. The confidence metrics climbed, the error rates dropped. They were getting close to something real, an actual framework for understanding what these animals were communicating to each other. Then, in the final weeks of the study, the data broke. Not gradually. The shift was sudden. A new pattern appeared inside the crow vocalizations, a strange rhythmic modulation in the structural layer of their calls that had never appeared in any prior corvid research anywhere. Not a regional variation, not a dialect shift, a fundamental reorganization of the underlying rules, like waking up one day and finding that English had changed its grammar overnight. And then it spread. The new pattern moved through the local flocks with the same viral speed the team had documented in the geographic mapping data. Territory by territory, the modulation propagated outward. Within weeks, the AI's confidence metrics had collapsed. The translation map no longer applied. The machine that had been decoding was now just recording noise, sifting through permutations, looking for a pattern key that no longer existed. The scientists do not have a consensus explanation. The data is still being processed. But some corvid behaviorists have a theory, and it is not a comfortable one. They think the crows noticed the study. Here is the reasoning. Crows are known to test their environment constantly. They drop hard-shelled nuts in traffic lanes to get cars to crack them open. They approach predators to gauge reaction thresholds. They probe the rules of the world they live in continuously because understanding those rules is how they stay alive. Over the course of the study, the humans in the monitored zones were behaving strangely, not responding to crow calls the way humans normally do. Not shooing them away, not flinching, not looking up, just sitting still, watching, recording. The crows, according to the theory, detected the anomaly. They recognized that they were subjects of an observation, and they responded the only way an intelligent species with a continent-spanning communication network could respond. They changed the cipher. This sounds impossible. We like to think of encryption as a uniquely human invention, born from warfare and mathematics. But consider what we have established about these animals in the last hour. They manufacture tools with complex designs. They recognize individual human faces for 5 years across generational handoffs. They run a continent-wide knowledge network that updates in real time. They have courts and funerals and cross-species trade agreements. Is it actually a stretch to suggest that the same cognitive flexibility that builds a saw from a leaf might also detect surveillance and respond by scrambling the signal? If the theory is correct, then the chaotic noise the AI is now recording is not silence. It is deliberate interference. White noise generated to occupy the listener's attention, while the real information travels on a frequency or through a physical channel that the research team has not yet thought to monitor. We built the most sophisticated listening system we could. They heard it, and they went quiet. What this reveals about us. Crow communication was just decoded, and here is what it reveals about humans. We have been the subject of an ongoing study for longer than we have been conducting our own. While we looked at crows and saw pests and scavengers, they were building dossiers. They categorized us by behavior, by threat level, by social utility. They named us and broadcast those names through a network that spans continents and outlasts generations. They performed forensic analysis on their dead to update their threat databases. They enforced social laws with collective punishment. They paid their allies, and they never forgot their enemies. The moment we developed an AI sophisticated enough to analyze their communication, the first thing we learned was that they were already analyzing ours. We thought we were the invisible observers, looking in through the glass. The glass was a mirror, and something was looking back at us the entire time. Think about what that means. Every crow you have ever walked past without acknowledging was logging your face. Every time you shooed one off a fence, an entry was updated somewhere in the network. Every time you left out food or didn't, a record was amended. You have a reputation in their system right now that you have never seen and cannot access. It may be older than your car. It exists in the memories of birds you have never personally encountered, in cities you may never visit, in flocks that received your file through a distribution chain you will never be able to trace. The next time you see a crow on a telephone wire watching you walk to your car, it is not looking at you the way you would look at a squirrel crossing a road. It is processing your face, checking it against the distributed database, updating the entry, deciding, based on everything the network knows about you, exactly what category you fall into. And somewhere in the canopy above your head, a call goes out. Your name, the one they gave you, passed from bird to bird, updated in real time, filed in a memory that will outlast you. The crows know you. They have always known you. We just spent a very long time assuming that nothing that small could possibly be paying attention. If this changes how you will move through the world, subscribe now, because we have more waiting for you. Drop a comment below and tell us. Do you think the cipher change was deliberate? Because the researchers are still not sure, and neither are we.